Welcome back. Now we continue to bring you live coverage of President Zuma's last days in office. Joining me in studio now is Dr. Mazwe Majola. He's a leadership expert and organizational strategist. And from our Pretoria studio, we have Professor Kyaleboga Mapunye. He's the Brigalier BAM Chair in Electoral Democracy in Africa at UNISA. Prof. Mapunye, as well as Dr. Majola, thank you very much for joining us on SABC News. It's been a hectic 2 days, actually 2 weeks essentially. But Prof. Mapunye, I want to start with you. Let's look at how this recall has been handled.
Well, Tabile, this recall has been handled, through difficulties. Obviously, this is not a very good time for the party, for the African National Congress, as the governing party in South Africa, to be handling such an event. And one should actually say a historic event, because this reminds us of the previous recall. This is now the second time, in the new democracy since 1994 that a sitting president, is being recalled. So far it has been handled with, the difficulties that this process entails, with caution here and there, but also there have been tensions within the party and within the different structures of the governing, African National Congress.
Doc, let's further look at the sentiment around the tensions within the party. Something that keeps coming up is the indecisiveness of specifically the current ANC leadership pointing to Cyril Ramaphosa. Your sentiment on that?
Yeah, I know that there's been a lot of criticism towards Cyril Ramaphosa. The perception has been that he has been so indecisive. I differ with that. ANC is what we'll call a complex organization. It's not a complicated organization. So in leadership or in organization, there's a difference between a complicated organization and a complex organization. So when you deal with an organization like ANC, you've got to be very, very cautious and very careful as the way you are doing things. So from my side, I would say credit to Cyril Ramaphosa. I think he has handled and treated and managed this issue with dignity, deserves, and decorum, and really he had to make sure that whatever he does, he is not only doing it bowing down to pressure from other people, but he has done very well.
Prof, I'd like to bring you in here and look at what's currently unfolding. For the past 2 weeks, and specifically yesterday, we've seen the ANC leadership hopping from one meeting to another. Let's look at some of the potential scenarios that we could see unfolding within the next day or two, because that deadline is looming. The president only has that 48 hours that was given to him by the NEC.
Absolutely. The potential scenarios are many, because they depend on the different structures of the ANC, most notably, obviously, the role of the NEC today, based on the statement that they issued about finally taking this decision of recalling the president. But there's also the issue of the parliamentary process that we should not be oblivious about. In terms of Chapter 5 of the Constitution, which deals with issues around impeachment, around the vote of no confidence, and also what we have just heard in your previous clips, information, or rather the signals from the opposition political parties about what they intend to do. In other words, they would like to also follow the parliamentary process. However, there's also the role of the presidency, which we must not disregard, because President Zuma is still in office, and of course President Zuma is covered by the Constitution also. So there are quite likely to be a number of scenarios. This is not just a mechanical, process, structural process, but one should emphasize that it is actually a political process, which the party has been trying to manage, politically. But we also have to be aware that there are constitutional, very serious constitutional, as well as underlying legal, requirements and processes that we shouldn't overlook.
Now, Dr. Majola, at the end of the ANC's elective conference in December, as well as this period, we've heard ANC President Cyril Ramaphosa saying that they want to handle this in such a way that President Jacob Zuma is not humiliated. Now, today, the ANC's chairperson, Gwede Mantashe, comes out saying that the party may not be able to spare President Zuma of the humiliation of either impeachment or that motion of no confidence. What do you think this is stemming from? Is it a case of the party, the leadership specifically of the party, now being frustrated at this turmoil that the party finds itself in?
Indeed, I think the president of the ANC, Cyril Ramaphosa, has done his absolutely best to handle this matter with care and with dignity. And indeed, I mean, he's been genuine and authentic. He didn't want to humiliate the president of the country, but it has come to a stage where I think that they've come to say, you know, now enough is enough. We've engaged, because remember, he has been meeting with the president of the country for a while now, engaging him, asking him privately. But you can see that the man is very stubborn. The man is the kind of a person who's not easily bowed down. So, but there is a pressure. The pressure is coming from within the organization, which you can call it the endogenous pressure, from the members of the party, and the pressure coming from outside the organization, the exogenous factors. So Cyril is under huge pressure to say now we must take the decision. We've done everything in our power. It's up to the hands of Jacob Zuma. If he wants to be humiliated, but from our side, we've tried to protect him.
Doc, I'm actually glad that you mentioned that sense of urgency that the ANC seems to have now. But why has it taken so long? This pressure that you speak of is nothing new.
Yeah, as I'm saying that, unfortunately, when it comes to leadership issues, you know, you've got if you're a leader, you've got to be very cautious and careful in terms of how you implement certain things. Remember that when Cyril Ramaphosa took over, he wanted to unite the party, because he's just taken over from a very divided ANC. So he wants to unite the party, and then whatever he does, he didn't want to upset other people who still supported Jacob Zuma. So he preached unity and then to make sure that he pulls all the parties together so that they can move with unison in terms of moving forward with the organization.
Prof, this one is for you, and it's in relation to the unity that the ANC has been speaking of consistently since their elective conference, in fact, since before the elective conference, and continuously since the year has started. But we can't deny the divisions within the party, specifically the leadership of the ANC at this point in time. Now, any potential fallout that we can see taking place as soon as the president has made his decision, or if it continues and we see a parliamentary process taking place?
Well, there are possible, potential fallouts. We might not be able to pinpoint them specifically, because they depend on what's going to happen tomorrow, after hopefully, the address by President Zuma, and then what also might happen should the matter go all the way up to Parliament, and of course follow the full process of that Chapter 5 that I referred to earlier. But the potential fallouts also might be similar to the ones that we saw just around after the Polokwane conference, which gave birth to the likes of COPE as a party, including other senior members of the ANC, seemingly either jumping ship or aligning themselves with the smaller parties, or some even just distancing themselves from the political spectrum of the country, or going into political oblivion. So to that extent, this is quite worrisome for the ANC, I should take belief, in a sense that the idea is to try and make sure that they keep together this unity that talk that they had in the run-up to that December conference at Nasrec, as well as make sure that they keep the troops marching in line. Whether they will do that is might be a massive task to do, because we are quite aware that the person that is currently being discussed by the NEC today, and as well as the different structures of the ANC throughout the country. Some say that just his role of refusing to go, following the nudging, one should say, by the NEC, might cause divisions, in a sense that there are those who tend to agree that maybe he should stay on up until 2019 when the country goes for election, but there are those who say no, actually he should go now, because if he doesn't go, he might be a liability for the party in terms of its election campaign all the way up until the 2019 elections.
Now, Doc, I want us to shift focus a little bit and focus on President Zuma. As a man, as a leader, but as a president who finds himself in this situation. Let's look at that.
Jacob Zuma is a survivalist. He's the kind of a guy who has survived to so many storms. Actually, when he took over in 2009, and actually obviously as a president of the country in 2008 as a president of the ANC, he took over under a big cloud. I mean, it was the rape case, was the Shabir Sheikh, and since then he has been constantly controversial, but he has been so resilient and has been so, determined to move on. But unfortunately, during his term, really, look, I understand that every leader leaves a legacy. There's no leader that will not leave a legacy of some sort, whether it's a bad legacy or it's a good legacy. So Jacob Zuma does have some, or rather his legacy, which of course says it's more bad in terms of the things that he has been doing during his term.
Interesting sentiments there. Prof, let's look at this recurring theme of pressure. I remember early hours of this morning, UDM leader Bantu Olomisa tweeted about how it seems like the ANC is finally giving into the pressure that they are getting from the opposition. Is that a fair statement?
I think it's a fair statement in a sense that for many years, I would say about to 8 or 9 years or so, the opposition have been, at pains to point out that, they would like to remove the president, obviously for their own reasons. As opposition parties, they have a right, to do so in terms of the very same constitution that, we all subscribe to. South Africa not being a one-party state, but a multi-party democracy, even though some argue that actually it is a one-party dominant state in a sense that there's one party which dominates all stakes. But be that as it may, the issue of pressure, definitely, I would say that they have been chipping away at this edifice, the strength of the African National Congress. Of course, they have not always succeeded. We know all those motions of no confidence that have not succeeded. And to that extent, that points to the stature of President Zuma himself as an individual, as a personality. But also we mustn't forget that there's a serious interplay here of what we call participatory democracy from the side of the people that elect the African National Congress come every election, as well as representative democracy, whereby those people that are elected subsequently go on to form the 400 plus members of parliament that will obviously be governing every 5 years or so. So this interplay of participatory democracy and representative democracy is, for me, actually the crux of what we should be thinking about, what the lessons to learn from this. Yes, the pressure has been there, but the pressure has been happening within the remits, within the precincts of that interplay between representative democracy and participatory democracy.
Doc, I'm actually glad the professor mentioned that there are so many lessons that can be learned from this. What are the lessons that ordinary South Africans can learn from the frictions within the ruling party? Because I think a lot of the time the voter the average ordinary South African is forgotten in this context, but the country in reality has been in a state of limbo since the State of the Nation address was postponed. Now budget is looming, so much is happening, and it seems like, you know, South Africans are being forgotten in this context.
From leadership point of view, I think it's a great lesson to all of us and to the ANC in particular, that there shouldn't be any individual, be it a president or in any office or position in the organization, who must rise to the point where he feels that he's bigger than the organization. I think, unfortunately, President Jacob Zuma, wittingly or unwittingly, he came to that point where he thought he was bigger than the organization. He was so intoxicated with power, but he failed to understand that the power he had was what we'll call the positional power, was not the personal power. The positional power is a power that stems from the organization. The positional power is not your power. It's a rented out power. It's something that an organization can take at any given time. But unfortunately, Jacob Zuma has been allowed for so long to become so powerful, so big, even bigger than the organization. So he has developed the spirit, or you'd call it the principle of indispensability, where he thought he was so indispensable. He has developed the spirit or the principle of invincibility and the principle of indomitability, where he thought no one will ever touch him. He was untouchable. Whatever he says, everyone will bow down. The organization is bigger than the individual. Individuals come and go. Presidents come and go. Presidents are elected. There is a starting date and the end date. It's not a monarchy. It's a position that it's owned by the organization. So that's a great lesson for ANC and for the whole country in general.
Gentlemen, we're running out of time, but Prof, just finally, your closing remarks and maybe expectations on the way forward.
Expectations on the way forward, I expect all South Africans, political parties in particular, to learn that accountability is the way to go as we prepare the future towards the next elections in South Africa. It is not about party, it is not about individual. For me, the biggest issue is about the country based on the constitution and the rule of law. So we would expect that people would subscribe to those, you know, very important tenets and not think about the individual and the here and now.
Prof Mapunye, Dr. Majola, thank you very much for joining us on SABC News. It's been quite an insightful discussion. That was Dr. Majola, leadership expert and organizational strategist, as well as Professor Gyalebucha Mapunye, who is the Regalia Bum Chair in Electoral Democracy in Africa at UNISA. We're back with more news at the top of the hour.